My loves, come close. Miriam Ashworth is 32, a black woman with steady hands and a stethoscope she's worn since nursing school, walking home through the South Side cold at 2 a.m. after a double shift. In the small apartment above her, a 6-year-old boy sleeps under a nightlight shaped like the moon. She has raised him for 3 years in love and a stranger's cash envelopes. He does not speak. She calls him Leo. She has never once needed him to be anyone else. Then the pulse monitor screams. 3 a.m. Leo's chest hitches, stops, hitches again. Miriam is on her knees beside the bed before she's fully awake, counting breaths, reaching for the nebulizer she keeps loaded and ready, the way she keeps everything ready, because ready is the only thing standing between this boy and the worst day of her life. She pulls back the collar of his pajamas to check his color, and her fingers brush something behind his ear. A birthmark, violet, crescent-shaped. She has seen it 1,000 times and never once thought to wonder what it meant. Half a world away, in a glass office above the Han River, a man's phone lights up with a single alert. A facial match, a blood phenotype, a location pin over Chicago. Jeong Geon-yeong sets down his cane, its silver head cold in his palm, and looks at the photograph that has not left his desk in 3 years. A boy with a violet crescent behind his ear. He says one word to the men waiting at the door. He does not raise his voice. He never has to. A car is already moving toward the airport. In Chicago, Miriam has no idea the envelope of cash on her kitchen counter this month, like every month, comes from a man who is about to become the most dangerous person to ever walk into her life, or that by the end of this story, she'll be the only one standing between Leo and the people hunting him. Subscribe if you want to be there when the white tiger finds his son, and drop a comment telling me what you'd do in Miriam's shoes. I read every single one, and I'll be right there with you the whole way through. Miriam has learned to sleep with one ear open, the way mothers of sick children do, her body never fully surrendering to rest, even after 16 hours on her feet. So when Leo's breathing changes at 3 in the morning, that faint, terrible whistle at the top of his inhale, she is moving before her mind catches up to her hands. She is in his room in 4 strides, the nightlight throwing its soft moon glow across his face, and she sees it immediately. The flare of his nostrils, the way his small chest is pulling in at the ribs, sucking for air that won't come easy. She doesn't panic. Panic is a luxury she gave up the first month she had him, when she learned that his throat could close like a fist, and the only thing standing between him and a hospital was her own steady hands. "I've got you, baby," she says, low and even, the same voice she's used every time for 3 years, because she read once that children in distress remember tones long after they forget words, and Leo doesn't have words to forget. She has the nebulizer running in under a minute, the mask fitted gently over his nose and mouth, her palm resting flat against his back, so he can feel her count his breaths with him. In, hold, out, in, hold, out. His dark eyes find hers over the edge of the mask, wide and trusting, in a way that still undoes her every single time, and she thinks, not for the first time, that trust like this is the heaviest thing she has ever carried. She was not supposed to keep him. That's the truth she doesn't say out loud, not even to herself most days. 3 years ago, a man she never got a clear look at, face turned from the streetlight, hands gloved even in August, left a folder on her doorstep with a name that wasn't a name. Leo, just Leo, no last name, no birth certificate, no medical history beyond a single sheet listing his allergies and his blood type, and a stack of cash thick enough to cover 6 months of a private nurse's salary. There was a note, 4 sentences. "He is not safe with the people who would come looking. You are the only one who can keep him breathing. Do not ask questions. Payment will continue as long as you do not." She should have called someone. CPS, the police, anyone. She tells herself that some nights, staring at the ceiling, running the math on all the ways she broke rules she'd sworn to follow. But she'd taken one look at him, silent, hollow-eyed, flinching at the sound of the door, and something in her chest had simply refused to let him go into a system that had already failed her twice, once as a foster kid herself, and once as a nurse watching too many broken children get shuffled between strangers. So she kept him. She built a life around him, quietly, carefully, the cash envelopes arriving on the first of every month like clockwork, never a name attached, never a way to trace them back. 3 years of midnight shifts like this one. 3 years of a boy who doesn't speak, but who reaches for her hand every single time the world gets too loud. The nebulizer hisses its last cloud of mist, and Leo's breathing evens out, the whistle fading, his small body going loose with relief against her shoulder. Miriam presses her lips to the crown of his head and breathes in the smell of him, soap and sleep, and something that is just Leo, and allows herself 30 seconds of stillness before she starts cleaning up, because there is always cleaning up, always the next thing, always the quiet vigilance of a life built on borrowed time. She does not know yet that a boy's whistling breath at 3 in the morning is about to become the least of her problems. The pediatrician's office had been telling her for months that Leo needed a specialist. His blood work kept flagging something unusual, a phenotype rare enough that the lab technicians always did a double take, always ran it twice to be sure. Miriam had put it off as long as she could, wary of hospitals asking questions she couldn't answer, about a boy with no last name and no paper trail, but the flags kept coming back, and finally she couldn't put it off any longer. Lurie Children's has a hematology department, with the equipment to actually make sense of what's happening in Leo's blood, and Miriam has decided that whatever mystery she's protecting him from matters less than keeping him alive. She holds his hand through the elevator ride up, through the waiting room where he presses himself into her side and watches the door like it might turn into something dangerous. The phlebotomist is gentle, practiced, gets the draw done in one try, while Miriam murmurs the countdown into his ear, the way she always does. It should be routine. It should be nothing. What Miriam doesn't see, what no one in that quiet, fluorescent-lit lab sees, is the moment the automated analyzer finishes cross-referencing Leo's blood panel against a database that has nothing to do with the hospital's own records. A rare compound genetic marker, one carried by fewer than a handful of documented bloodlines worldwide, pings a match buried inside an international registry that most hospital staff don't even know exists. A private, encrypted watch list, quietly funded by people with more money and more reach than any government agency admits to working with. Somewhere in a server farm outside Seoul, a flag turns from gray to red. An address in Chicago attaches itself to a name that hasn't been spoken aloud in 3 years. A notification goes out, not to any hospital administrator, not to any police department, but to a private number belonging to a man who has spent 3 years and an obscene amount of money looking for exactly this. Miriam signs Leo's discharge paperwork, tucks a sticker on his shirt for being brave, and takes her son home with no idea that somewhere a very quiet, very expensive machine has just started counting down the hours until someone comes for him. The knock on her apartment door 2 days later isn't a knock at all. It's the click of a lock being defeated by someone who knows exactly what they're doing, and then her front door is open and there are men filling the space where her doorway used to be. 4 of them, dark suits, wired earpieces, moving with the kind of coordinated silence that tells Miriam immediately, these are not police, are not anyone she can call for help. She puts herself between them and the hallway that leads to Leo's room, before she's even decided to.
"Get out of my house,"
she says, and her voice doesn't shake. though everything under her ribs is shaking hard enough to crack. The nearest man doesn't answer her. He speaks instead into the cuff of his sleeve, a low stream of Korean, and 30 seconds later, the answer comes back. They are not here to hurt her. They are here because a plane has just landed at O'Hare, carrying a man who has crossed an ocean for a 6-year-old boy with a violet birthmark behind his ear, and nothing on this earth is going to stop him from walking through that door. They don't force their way past her. They wait, oddly, unnervingly patient, positioned at the windows and the stairwell, like they're guarding her building rather than invading it. And Miriam realizes, with a cold drop in her stomach, that whatever is coming, these men aren't the danger, they're the outer edge of it. 2 hours later, a black SUV pulls up outside her building, followed by a second, and Miriam watches from her window as a tall man steps out into the gray Chicago afternoon, silver-streaked hair, a charcoal suit cut close to a frame that carries itself like something coiled. He doesn't rush. He looks up at her building, the way a man looks at something he has been waiting 3 years to see, and even from 4 floors up, Miriam feels the weight of that gaze land on her like a hand closing around her throat. She locks Leo's door, presses her back against it, and for the first time in 3 years, wishes she'd asked more questions. He doesn't come alone into the apartment. He comes with 2 men flanking him and a stillness that fills the room before he's even said a word. And Miriam meets him in the narrow hallway with a syringe held low against her thigh, insulin sharp and ready. Because if this man has come across the world for her son, she is not going down without drawing blood of her own. "You don't know what you're protecting," the man says. His English is precise, unhurried, an accent that curls at the edges of certain words. "But I think you already understand that you are protecting something." "I'm protecting my son," Miriam says. "Whatever you think you're owed, you're not walking past me to get it." Something shifts in his face at the word son. Not softness, not exactly, but a flicker of something old and complicated. "His name is Min Jun," he says quietly. "He was taken from me when he was 3 years old. I am not here to hurt him. I am here because I have spent 3 years believing he was dead, and 2 days ago, I learned he might not be." Miriam doesn't lower the syringe. "Prove it." So he does. A private physician is already in the hallway with a portable DNA kit, the kind Miriam has only ever seen in television dramas, and she stands there with her heart slamming, while a technician swabs the inside of Leo's cheek. Leo, silent and wide-eyed, clutching Miriam's leg through the entire process, and runs it against a sample the man produces from his own mouth. The results take 11 minutes. Miriam counts every second of them. When the technician reads the number aloud, 99.99%, the man closes his eyes for a moment, and Miriam watches something break open behind his composed face. Grief, relief, 3 years of both tangled together. "My name is Jeong Geon-yeong," he says when he opens his eyes again, "and you have kept my son alive for 3 years that I could not. Whatever else happens after tonight, you will not be pushed aside for that. But you need to understand, the people who took him from me are still out there, and now that I've found him, they'll know it too." Miriam finally lowers the syringe, but she doesn't let go of Leo's hand. "Then you'd better tell me who I've actually been protecting him from." The answer comes 2 nights later, and it comes from the last place Miriam expects, Leo's medicine cabinet. Jeon-yeong's people have moved them into a secured hotel suite, guards posted at every exit, and Miriam spends the first night unable to sleep, running through 3 years of memory with new eyes. Every cash envelope, every unmarked delivery of Leo's specialized asthma medication, formulated by a compounding pharmacy she'd never actually visited, always dropped off by courier, always exactly on schedule. She'd never questioned it, because questioning it might mean it stopped, and Leo needed that medication to breathe. She asks Jeon-yeong for a lab. He gives her one within the hour, a private facility on the 20th floor of a building she's fairly sure he owns outright. And Miriam personally hands over 3 years of Leo's medication vials to a chemist who runs them through a mass spectrometer while she paces the hallway outside, chewing the inside of her cheek raw. The chemist finds it just before dawn. Not in every vial. That would have been too easy to catch, too fast to kill a boy whose sudden death might draw attention. Just trace amounts, cumulative, building slowly in his system over months and years. A compound the chemist has to look up twice to be sure he's reading it right. Something designed to mimic the natural progression of Leo's existing respiratory condition. Something that would have looked, to any doctor, to any coroner, like a child simply losing a long battle with a rare illness. Someone has been poisoning Leo, slowly, patiently, for years. Miriam sits down hard in the hallway chair when the chemist tells her, because her knees simply stop holding her up, and all she can think about is every 3 a.m. asthma attack, every terrifying whistle in his breathing that she'd blamed on his condition, on bad luck, on the universe being cruel to a boy who'd already lost so much. Not bad luck. Someone had been doing this to him, someone who had access to his medication, who had known exactly how much poison to add and how much to withhold to keep him sick, but not dead, kept alive just enough to remain useful, hidden just well enough to stay lost. Jeong-yeong goes very still when she tells him, and for the first time since he walked into her apartment, Miriam sees something in his face that looks less like grief and more like the specific, focused stillness of a man deciding exactly how someone is going to die. Only a handful of people knew where he was placed, he says, almost to himself. Only a handful of people had access to arrange a courier that was consistent, that clean, for 3 years. Then you already know who did this, Miriam says. I know who arranged the placement, Jeong-yeong says, and something in his voice goes cold in a way that makes even Miriam, syringe brave 12 hours earlier, take an involuntary step back. The question I need answered now is why my most trusted man would keep my son alive just enough to use him, and what he's still planning to do with him. Outside, the sun is coming up over Lake Michigan, gold and indifferent, and somewhere across the city, a man named Park Jin-woo is about to find out that his carefully poisoned secret has just been discovered 3 years too early. Subscribe if you need to know what Jin-woo's been planning all along, and comment on the emoji that matches how you're feeling right now. I'll be scrolling through every single one of them tonight. The paperwork comes back by mid-morning, and Jeong-yeong reads it standing at the window of the hotel suite, with his back to the room, so still that Miriam almost doesn't recognize the sound that comes out of him. Not quite a laugh, not quite a growl, something low and furious caught between the two. Every courier route, he says. Every compounding order, every payment that funded this apartment, this life you built for him, all of it was authorized through one signature. He turns, and the paper in his hand is shaking, just slightly, the only visible crack in a composure Miriam has watched hold through DNA results and poisoned vials and 3 years of grief. Park Jin-woo, my second, the man who has stood at my right hand for 11 years, the man I trusted to run half my organization while I searched the world for my son. Miriam feels something cold settle in her stomach. Your second in command placed him with me. My second in command took him from me, Jeong-yeong says. 3 years ago, when Min-jun was taken, I believed it was a rival family. I spent 3 years hunting the wrong enemy, spending money and blood on the wrong war, while the man standing beside me, at every strategy meeting, knew exactly where my son was the entire time. He sets the paper down with a care that somehow frightens Miriam more than if he'd thrown it. He didn't want Min-jun dead outright. A dead heir draws questions, autopsies, suspicion. But a sickly boy, quietly fading from a condition no one can quite explain, hid safely out of the country until the timing served him. That draws nothing. That's simply a tragedy. Why keep him alive at all, if he wanted him gone? Jeong-yeong's jaw tightens. Because as long as Min-jun's death isn't confirmed, Jin-woo can control the narrative around my succession without ever officially claiming the throne himself. He's had 3 years to build support inside my organization for exactly this moment, a moment where the true heir simply never comes home, and the man who's been quietly running things in my absence becomes the obvious, blameless choice to formalize what he's already built. He looks toward the closed door of the bedroom where Leo is sleeping, exhausted, unaware. He would have let my son die by inches, in a country I never thought to search, at the hands of a woman he never expected to love him enough to keep him alive against the odds. Miriam's throat goes tight. So what happens now that you know? Now, Jeong-yeong says, and something settles over his face that is worse than anger, quieter and more absolute. Jin-woo finds out that his 3 years of patience just ran out in a single afternoon, which means he will stop being patient too. He's not wrong. Within the hour, one of his security team bursts into the suite with a tablet already streaming footage. A black sedan parked across the street from the hotel for the past 40 minutes. 3 men inside, none of them bothering to hide the fact that they're watching the building. Jeong-yeong's face goes to stone as he watches the feed. He knows the paperwork was pulled, he says. He'll have people inside my own organization who report to him first, and me second. That's how he's survived running a shadow campaign under my nose for 3 years without me noticing. He's already moving, already barking orders in rapid Korean to the men flooding into the room, and Miriam finds herself swept into motion before she's fully processed what's happening. We can't stay here. If Jin-woo believes we have proof, if he believes the vials and the paperwork are enough to end him, he won't wait for a trial. He'll come for the evidence and everyone standing near it. Leo's still recovering from that DNA draw 2 days ago, Miriam says, already moving toward the bedroom, nurse brain overriding fear. He needs stability, not, he needs to be alive, Jeong-yeong says, not unkindly, but final. I can give him stability once he's safe. I cannot give him anything if Jin-woo's men reach this room first. Outside the window, Miriam can see the sky over Lake Michigan has gone a bruised, heavy gray, the kind of color that means Chicago is about to remember exactly what winter is for. A blizzard warning scrolls silently across the muted television in the corner of the suite, and Jeong-yeong glances at it with an expression Miriam can't quite read. Calculation, maybe, or the first flicker of something like a plan. The storm will slow every road in this city, he says. It will slow us, but it will slow Jin-woo's men too, and unlike them, I know exactly where we're going. 20 minutes later, Miriam is bundling Leo into a coat 2 sizes too big, tucking his worn baby blanket, the one relic of his infancy she'd never been able to explain and never had the heart to throw away, into a duffel bag, alongside his medication and the emergency inhaler she never lets out of arm's reach. Leo watches her with wide, silent eyes, sensing the fear under her calm, the way children always do, and reaches for her hand without being asked. We're going on an adventure, she tells him, voice steady, even though her hands aren't quite. You and me, just like always. Except it isn't just the 2 of them anymore, and as they're hustled down a service stairwell into a waiting convoy of black SUVs, snow already beginning to needle sideways through the streetlights, Miriam understands that the life she built in secret for 3 years has just collided, permanently, with a war she never knew she was standing in the middle of. The storm hits full force somewhere around the on-ramp to the interstate, snow coming down in a white, blinding wall that swallows the taillights of the cars ahead, and Miriam sits in the back of the second SUV with Leo pressed against her side, his small hand fisted in the fabric of her coat, while the driver in front navigates roads that have gone from difficult to nearly invisible. "How far?" Miriam asks, when the silence in the car stretches too tight to bear. "A property outside the city," Geon-yeong says from the seat across from her. He's on his phone, jaw tight, listening to something in rapid Korean that makes the muscle along his jaw jump. "Secure, isolated. My people are the only ones who know it exists." He lowers the phone, and whatever he heard has visibly cost him something. Jinwoo's men followed the first convoy that left the hotel. A decoy. It bought us time, but not much. He'll know within the hour that we didn't take the route he expected. Miriam's stomach drops. He'll come here. He'll try. Jeon-yeong's eyes flick to Leo, to the way the boy has gone rigid and silent against Miriam's side, sensing danger with the particular radar of a child who has spent his whole short life being hidden from something. "Which is why we're not staying at the property either. It's a stop, not a destination. We move again once the storm gives us enough cover to lose anyone tracking the convoy." The SUV fishtails slightly on a patch of ice, and Miriam's arm tightens instinctively around Leo, and in the sudden lurch, she feels something small and hard-pressed against her ribs through the duffel bag. The corner of the silver locket, tangled in the folds of Leo's baby blanket, the one piece of his past that came with him 3 years ago, and that Miriam has never once managed to pry open. She's tried, in idle moments over the years, working a fingernail into the seam without success, eventually deciding it was simply decorative, sealed shut by age or design. She doesn't think much of it now, not with the wind screaming against the windows and Leo's breathing starting to hitch with the particular thin whistle she's learned to fear. Cold air and stress conspiring against already fragile lungs. She has the inhaler out and in his hand before Jeon-yeong even finishes his next sentence, coaching Leo through slow breaths with the same steady murmur she's used 1,000 times before. And for a few minutes, the war outside the car doesn't matter at all, because the only thing that matters is the boy in her arms remembering how to breathe. Behind them, headlights cut through the snow. Too many, too close, moving with the kind of aggressive speed that has nothing to do with weather caution. "Jeon-yeong," Miriam says, and something in her voice makes him turn immediately toward the rear window. His face goes hard. "They found the route." The convoy accelerates, snow chains biting into ice, and Miriam holds Leo tighter, pressing his face into her shoulder so he won't see the headlights closing the distance behind them, won't hear the tight, urgent Korean crackling over Jeon-yeong's radio as his security team scrambles to answer a threat that arrived faster than any of them had planned for. They lose the tail, somewhere past the edge of the city, a sharp turn down an access road that Jinwoo's men either don't know about or can't navigate fast enough in the storm to follow. And by the time the convoy finally slows outside a low, unmarked building near the edge of a frozen industrial stretch, Miriam's hands have gone numb from how hard she's been gripping Leo through the last 20 minutes of driving. Inside, the safe house is spare but warm, guards already posted at every window, and Miriam finally lets herself breathe once Leo is settled on a couch, with a blanket, and the last of his color returning to his cheeks. It's while she's digging through the duffel bag for his evening dose of medication that her fingers catch again on the locket, and this time, exhausted and raw, and unwilling to let one more mystery sit unresolved, in a day already overflowing with them, she works at the clasp with real determination. It gives, finally, with a small, stubborn click. There's no photograph inside, no lock of hair, nothing sentimental at all, just a sliver of dark plastic no bigger than her thumbnail, embedded flush into the locket's inner face, clearly never meant to be found by casual inspection. Miriam turns it toward the lamp, frowning, and it takes her a moment to recognize what she's looking at. "Jeon-yeong," she says, and something in her tone brings him across the room immediately. He goes very still when he sees it. A micro drive. He takes it from her with a care that borders on reverence, turning it over in the lamplight. Where was this? Sealed inside the locket. It's been in his baby blanket this whole time. I thought it was just decorative. I could never get it open before. Geon-yeong's expression shifts through several things at once. Shock, something that might be grief, and underneath it, a dawning, dangerous understanding. This was his mother's, he says quietly. Sua, Minjun's mother. She died 3 years ago, the week before he disappeared. Officially, an accident. I never believed that, but I could never prove otherwise. He closes his fist around the drive. If she hid something inside his locket in the days before her death, she was protecting it, which means she knew something was coming. It takes his tech specialist less than 20 minutes to get the drive readable, and what unspools across the laptop screen in the safe house's back room makes Jeong-yeong go rigid in a way Miriam hasn't seen from him yet. Not fury, this time, but something closer to devastation, held very tightly in check. It's the full ledger, he says, scrolling through columns of encrypted transactions now laid bare. Every account Jin-woo has been quietly siphoning funds into for the past 4 years. Every bribe, every shell company, every piece of the foundation he's been building to take my organization out from under me. He looks up, and his eyes find Miriam's with something that might be the closest he's come yet to genuine gratitude. Sua found this before she died. She must have confronted him, or come close enough that he decided she was a liability. She hid the proof where she knew it would be safest, with our son, wherever he ended up. She protected him even then, Miriam says quietly, and something in her chest aches for a woman she never met, who made the same impossible calculation Miriam herself has been making for 3 years, that a child's safety is worth any cost, including your own. Jeong-yeong closes the laptop slowly. This is everything I need to end him, not just to stop him, to make certain nothing like this ever threatens Minjun again. He looks toward the doorway, where Leo has fallen asleep on the couch, blanket tucked around him, entirely unaware that the locket that's traveled with him his whole life just became the single most dangerous object in his father's world. But Jin-woo will know this drive exists. His network inside my organization will already be reporting that the boy's belongings were searched. He'll assume the worst, and a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous version of any enemy. Outside, the storm hasn't let up, wind screaming against the safe house windows hard enough to rattle the glass, and somewhere out in that white, roaring dark, a man who has spent 3 years hiding a small boy is about to gamble everything on erasing the evidence before it erases him first. The call comes just before midnight. One of Jeong-yeong's own men, voice tight and urgent over the radio, reporting movement at a warehouse near the port that Jin-woo has used before for off-book meetings, a place chosen, Miriam realizes with cold dread, specifically because it's isolated enough that gunfire wouldn't draw attention even without a blizzard swallowing every sound in the city. He wants a trade, Jeong-yeong says, jaw tight, after listening to the full report. The drive for silence about the poisoning. He's bluffing. He has no intention of letting any of us leave that warehouse breathing. But he's also desperate enough that if I refuse to come, he'll simply come here instead, storm or no storm, and I would rather meet him on the ground I choose than wait for him to choose mine. You're not leaving Leo, Miriam says, already knowing, dreading, that this isn't a request being extended to her. I'm not leaving either of you, Jeong-yeong says. If Jin-woo believes there's any chance the boy isn't with me, he'll simply keep hunting until he finds him. The only way this ends tonight is if he sees, with his own eyes, that there is nothing left for him to salvage. The drive to the port feels endless, snow reducing visibility to almost nothing. Leo half asleep and fever warm against Miriam's side despite the cold, his breathing carrying a faint, worrying rasp that makes her keep 2 fingers pressed lightly to his pulse the entire way. She doesn't want to think about what it means that she's more frightened of his lungs failing than of the armed men waiting for them at the end of this drive. She doesn't have room to be frightened of both. The warehouse rises out of the storm, like something built from the dark itself, low and long and unlit except for a single work light swinging somewhere deep inside, and the moment their convoy rolls to a stop, Miriam can feel the air change, the particular held-breath stillness of a trap about to close. Jin-woo is waiting just inside the loading bay doors, flanked by 6 armed men, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his gold signet ring catching the single swinging light, as he lifts a hand in something almost like greeting. Up close, he doesn't look like a monster. He looks exactly what he is, a well-dressed, mild-mannered man who has spent 3 years poisoning a child by inches and calling it patience. Geon-yeong, he says warmly, as though this were any other meeting, and the nurse, and the boy. His eyes settle on Leo with an expression Miriam can't decode and doesn't want to. I'd hoped we could have resolved this without theater. You hid my son and slowly poisoned him for 3 years, Jeong-yeong says, voice flat and terrible. There was never a version of this that ended without a reckoning. Jin-woo's pleasant expression doesn't so much as flicker. The drive, then. Give it to me, and I'll let the 3 of you walk out of here. I have no interest in the boy once the ledger is gone. He becomes irrelevant to me the moment there's no evidence left to protect. You'll kill us the second it's in your hands, Miriam says, before she can stop herself, and Jin-woo's eyes cut to her with mild, almost curious surprise, as though a piece of furniture had spoken. She's not wrong, Jeong-yeong says quietly, and Miriam feels his hand find hers, steady, deliberate, a warning disguised as reassurance, which is why I never intended to hand it over at all. The warehouse erupts. Later, Miriam won't be able to reconstruct the exact order of what happens, the work light shattering in a spray of sparks as the first shot cracks through the cold air, Jeong-yeong's men pouring in from a side entrance she never even noticed, the sudden deafening chaos of gunfire ricocheting off metal shelving in every direction. She has one instinct, only one, and it overrides every other thought in her head. She wraps herself around Leo and drops, hard, behind a stack of shipping crates, shielding him with her whole body while the world detonates around them. It's in the middle of that chaos, crouched in the freezing dark with her heart slamming against her ribs, that she feels Leo go rigid against her. Not fear, this time, but something worse. His breathing, already thin and rasping from the cold and the stress of the drive, suddenly stops making any sound at all. His lips are going dusky in the dim emergency lighting. His small hands claw uselessly at his own throat. No, baby, look at me, Miriam says, fumbling instantly for the emergency inhaler, but she can already see it won't be enough, can see from the way his airway is closing that this isn't a normal flare, that somewhere between the cold and the terror and whatever residual damage, 3 years of slow poison left behind, his throat has simply seized shut. She doesn't have time to be afraid. She has spent 3 years training for exactly this moment, without ever admitting to herself that she was training for it. Stay with me, she says, voice fierce and low, hands already moving. The small emergency kit she never travels without. An IV catheter meant for entirely different purposes. Alcohol wipes she barely has time to use properly. Around her the gunfire continues, closer now, and somewhere she hears Jeong-yeong shouting her name, but she doesn't look up, can't look up. Every ounce of her attention narrowed to the terrifying, precise work of finding the right spot at the base of Leo's throat with her fingers, the way she was trained years ago for exactly this kind of catastrophic failure and prayed she would never actually have to use. The catheter goes in on her second try, her hands steadier than she has any right to expect, given the chaos exploding around her, and the sound Leo makes when air finally moves through the makeshift airway is the single most beautiful thing Miriam has ever heard in her life. His color starts to return almost immediately, his wide eyes fixed on her face, with an expression of pure, terrified trust that she will carry with her for the rest of her life. "That's it," she breathes, cradling his head against her chest, her own hands shaking now that the worst of it is over. "That's it, baby. You're okay. I've got you. I've got you." Above the crates, the gunfire is starting to thin, and through the ringing in her ears, Miriam hears Jeong-yeong's voice, raw and furious, and beneath it, finally, silence where Jin-woo's voice used to be. When Jeong-yeong finds them minutes later, crouched behind the crates with Leo breathing, raggedly, but breathing, through a makeshift airway in his throat, something in his face breaks open completely, all the careful control of the past 2 days finally giving way. "He's alive," Miriam says, before Jeong-yeong can ask, her voice cracking on the words. "He's alive. We need a hospital now, but he's alive." Jeong-yeong drops to his knees beside them in the snow-dusted dark, and for a moment, the most powerful man Miriam has ever met simply presses his forehead to his son's, silent, shaking, 3 years of grief finally allowed to break. Behind them, the warehouse has gone quiet, in the particular way that means the war is over. Leo spends 4 days in the hospital, and Miriam doesn't leave his side for more than the length of a shower the entire time, sleeping in the chair beside his bed, holding his hand through 2 follow-up procedures to properly repair what her emergency intervention had only stabilized. Jeong-yeong is there for all of it too, a constant, quiet presence in the doorway or the corner of the room, on the phone in low, controlled Korean, handling the aftermath of a war that ended in a warehouse but is still being cleaned up in boardrooms and back channels across 2 continents. Jin-woo doesn't survive the warehouse. Miriam doesn't ask for details, and Jeong-yeong doesn't offer them, but something in the set of his shoulders in the days that follow tells her the matter has been closed, as thoroughly and finally as it needed to be. The ledger drive, it turns out, does the rest of the work Jin-woo's death doesn't finish. Every account, every bribe, every piece of the shadow network he'd spent years building unravels within days once Jeong-yeong's people have the map to follow. It's on the 5th day, in a quiet conference room 3 floors above Leo's hospital bed, that Jeong-yeong sits across from Miriam, with a folder of legal paperwork between them and an expression more uncertain than she's ever seen him wear. "I want to be clear about what I'm asking," he says, "because I understand it's a great deal, and I understand you have no obligation to say yes." Miriam waits, arms crossed, wary in the particular way of someone who has learned not to trust good news arriving too easily. "I could take him," Jeong-yeong says. "Legally, biologically, I have every right to, but he doesn't know me. He knows you. 3 years of trust, of safety, of every single 3 a.m. you sat beside his bed. None of that transfers because a DNA test says I'm his father." He slides the folder across the table. "I'm asking you to stay, not as his nurse, as his mother, in every way that matters, with full legal standing beside mine. Co-guardianship, equal say in every decision about his care, his safety, his life. I have more resources than I know what to do with, and none of the instinct you have for keeping him alive. I don't want to raise him without you. I don't think I could, even if I tried." Miriam looks down at the paperwork, her name already typed in beside his, on lines that would once have seemed impossible, and thinks about a folder left on her doorstep 3 years ago, 4 sentences, and a stack of cash, and a boy who needed someone willing to keep every promise, even when no one was watching, to make sure she did. I never needed the money to stay, she says quietly. I stayed because he needed someone. That part doesn't change, just because you can afford better doctors than I can. I know, Jeong-yeong says. That's exactly why I'm asking. She signs her name on every line. Leo comes home 3 weeks later. Home now meaning a secured, sunlit house on the edge of the city. Guards discreet enough that Leo barely notices them. A room decorated in soft blues that Miriam picked out herself, while Jeong-yeong stood beside her in the store, asking her opinion on curtains with the same gravity he'd once used, discussing ledger drives and blood tests. It's an odd, patchwork kind of family, stitched together out of grief and near catastrophe, and 3 years of secrets. But it's steady, in a way Miriam recognizes, the same steadiness she spent 3 years building for a boy who needed exactly that and nothing more. It's on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after the warehouse, that Miriam is kneeling in front of Leo, helping him into his pajamas, half listening to Jeong-yeong on the phone in the next room, when Leo's small hand catches her sleeve. She looks up, expecting the familiar silent request: water, his blanket, the nightlight adjusted just so, and instead finds him watching her with an expression she's never quite seen on his face before, something working its way loose after 3 years of silence. "Mama," he says. It's soft and a little uncertain, the word of a child, testing whether the ground beneath it will hold. But it holds. Miriam feels it land somewhere in her chest, with the force of every sleepless night, every 3 a.m. crisis, every unanswered question she chose to carry rather than sit down, all of it arriving at once, in a single, small, perfect word. "I'm right here, baby," she says, voice breaking as she pulls him close. "I'm right here." In the doorway, Jeong-yeong has gone very still, phone forgotten in his hand, watching the two of them with an expression that finally, completely, lets go of 3 years of grief. Subscribe if that ending got you the way it got me, and comment your own name below. I want to know exactly who's been on this journey with us, from the very first chapter.